Hello everyone and welcome to chapter 17. Here we are going to look at the evolution of animals and the different adaptations that happened, how they diversified into the world. We're going to look at different phyla of animals. Remember our taxonomic ranks: domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Phylum is on there, and phylum is singular, phyla is plural. But most animals on the planet are arthropods. Within arthropods are beetles. Scientists have found over 350,000 species of beetles and counting. We'll be looking at flatworms, tapeworms that you can have inside of your intestines, and they release eggs there. We're going to be looking at some really interesting things. This is obviously a lady beetle or ladybug, and then right here we have a tapeworm. We'll look at mammals. So these are whales. These are mammals that dwell in water, the largest of which is the blue whale. And we'll look at reptiles. They have pretty cool metabolisms, and they can survive with only 10% of the total calories that a mammal needs in order to survive. Isn't that crazy? A mammal of its equivalent size, anyway. All of this started in the Precambrian. If you remember the geologic time periods we talked about, the Precambrian was the longest and it happened first. At that time, we had some multicellular organisms that could eat others, but not too many. So what exactly is an animal? It's eukaryotic, it's multicelled, and it's a heterotroph, which means it gets its energy by eating. Remember, autotrophs make their own energy. Plants are autotrophs. Animals are heterotrophs that must eat food to live. They can't make their own energy. So heterotrophs will eat autotrophs or other heterotrophs, basically. Most animals reproduce sexually. They have gametes. They go through meiosis. I'm not going to get into details in that. If you need more, then reference our chapter over meiosis. That being said, some animals do have the ability to reproduce asexually, and I think we even talked about one animal in a previous chapter in parthenogenesis. Animals have muscle cells and nerve cells that control muscles. These are brains of different animals. Notice how they have pretty much the same neural network formation and order if you just read through those different areas. Early animals hit the Cambrian explosion. We started at the Precambrian and now we're in the Cambrian, which is about 542 million years ago. We had animals undergoing rapid diversification during this Cambrian explosion. For example, adaptation, speciation, where we saw new species occurring. And how biologists determine phylogeny, how things were put together. We've talked about this before, but we used comparative anatomy, so comparing bone structure, and we used embryology, comparing embryos. The fossil record can show us when everything happened, but it can't tell us how everything's related. And there are three key hypothesized branching points, evolutionarily speaking, that is. So number one, we have true tissues. A tissue is a group of cells that work together for the same function. So your heart, for example, is made of cardiac muscle tissue. And all these work together to make your heart do its thing, right? Next, we have body symmetry. We'll look at different types. For example, if you cut down the center of our body, we're pretty equal on both sides, right? Left and right. Kind of mirror images. And then number three, we have body cavity inside of us. We have the thoracic cavity with our lungs that our heart and lungs are in. Then we have the abdominal pelvic cavity with our stomach and our intestines. The first branch, true tissues. Sponges are the intermediate between animals and not animals. They have different cells, but they're not true tissues. After that point, we see these groups of cells that are similar in structure and function that form tissues. And we have body symmetry. We have radial symmetry, where you can cut anywhere in half, like in picture A, and you'll get mirror images. Or you can have bilateral symmetry, picture B, what I just talked about with us, where you cut down the middle, down the sagittal plane, you have a right and left, and right and left areas are the same, mirror images. And then number 3, we have body cavities. They get more complex as we go, and they let us get more complex systems. In animals, there are 3 layers of development. We have the ectoderm, which is the outer layer, the mesoderm is the middle, and the endoderm is the internal. And these form the different parts of the body. And in us too, as we developed, we're observing here what happens inside of a flatworm, but we're obviously more complex than a flatworm. You can have some animals that have a true coelom, a pseudocoelom, or false coelom, and you can have some with no body cavity at all, so no coelom. True coeloms, like what we have, you have it lined on both sides down here of the mesoderm. So in our abdominal pelvic cavity with our digestive system in the middle, there's a lining around that, whereas in a pseudocoelom, you don't really see this lining that you see down here. So the space in the pseudocoelom isn't lined, right? All right, moving on. We're going to look at the phylogenetic tree and look at the different adaptations that occur. So first one, tissues. See that? True tissues, no true tissues. So everything after sponges has true tissues. But notice sponges don't. So we put no true tissues, and they're kind of over here on a limb on their own. And then you see radial symmetry with cnidarians. So if you cut it in half anyway, it'll be symmetrical. And then we see bilateral symmetry following. So everything after sponges and cnidarians is bilaterally symmetrical. Cnidarians are radially symmetrical, and then sponges do not have true tissues. The most common phylum are the invertebrates. These are animals without backbones. We don't really pay too much attention to them, but these are almost 95% of the animal kingdom, so we really like to look into these. So first we're going to start with the invertebrates. Again, those don't have a true backbone, and we're going to get more complex. So we're going to start simple and then move on to more complex organisms. First, we're going to talk about sponges. They're in phylum Porifera. Pores, sponges, not too hard to remember. These include sessile animals, means they don't move, and these lack true tissues. People used to think that sponges were plants, but nope, sponges are animals. Sponges draw water in, and this water gets collected, and the sponge then filters it, and we call this filter feeding, without getting into too many specifics. In this picture, you can see some cells that are thought to come from protists. Over here we see flagella. We haven't really talked about protists too much, but here we have these flagellates that were thought to have come together and differentiated into different cell types. Now we move on to cnidarians. They have radial symmetry. Basically, they're circular, and they have 2 forms. And they have what are called cnidocytes. So cytes are cells, and then this CNID means combining or forming. And cnidocytes are the parts that sting if you get stung by a jellyfish. The 2 different forms are the medusa and the polyp. The polyp is sessile. It stays in one place, it doesn't move. And then the medusa, the one that you're probably used to seeing with like jellyfish, is the free-floating form. These both have the same portions, but they have different structures. Some species of cnidarians will only ever be in the polyp form, whereas others can be in both forms depending on their life cycle. Polyps can be found in sea anemones and corals. Hydras, you may remember from the asexual reproduction chapter. And then medusas are what we call jellyfish. Next we have Phyla platyhelminthes, which flatworms are a part of. Platy means flat, helminthes means worms. And here we go from radial symmetry to bilateral symmetry. Planaria are examples that most biology students get to see in labs, and the bottom picture right there on the left is of a marine flatworm with pretty cool coloration. Remember back to our diffusion talk? Well, flatworms don't have a respiratory system, and they use diffusion for the cells in the middle of their body to get oxygen. These flatworms also have eye spots. They can sense light versus dark. And we really see the cephalization happening here, so this means that a head is developing. Alrighty, so some flatworms can be parasitic, like blood flukes, for example, as well as tapeworms. With tapeworm, they have long bodies and they're hermaphroditic, so they have both male and female reproductive structures. That bottom picture is of the head of the tapeworm, and you can see little hooks. These hooks allow the tapeworm to get in and then stay in the digestive system, in the intestines. When they're ingested, when they're eaten, they get down to your digestive system and they start to grow. Then they send off these little detachable squares on their bodies. So because they're hermaphroditic, the egg is fertilized. So anyway, when they send off these little detachable squares, they send them off in fecal matter. Then someone else ingests the fecal matter, and this usually happens whenever unsanitary water is ingested. So whenever someone or something drinks unsanitary water, it can get exposed to tapeworms. And then when they drink this water, the tapeworm eggs get in, they get into the digestive tract, and they start growing again. Pretty nasty, right? Next we have nematodes, so roundworms. These are all over the place, like hookworm if we eat undercooked pork, or trichinella down here in this picture, and pigs. You'll ingest these eggs. And then the females will produce more eggs. Roundworms have a interesting body system. There are two openings, a mouth and an anus, and a complete digestive tract. Flatworms, so platyhelminthes that we just talked about, they only had a mouth. So see how we're getting a little bit more complex? We go from only a mouth to a mouth and anus, a complete digestive tract, and we'll keep on getting more and more complicated. And next we have annelids. So these are worms with body segmentation, like an earthworm. Some people wonder how they're different from roundworms. Well, earthworms are more complex. They have hearts. Yes, hearts plural. They have 5 of them specifically. And they have blood vessels, so this is definitely getting more complex than what we saw previously. And there are 3 main classes of annelids. Earthworms go through the soil and they break down nutrients so that plants can use them more easily, and they're really good for gardens. We have polychaetes. They burrow in the sea floor. Poly means many, chaetes are bristles, so as you can see, they have many bristles, right? And number 3, we have leeches, some of which are parasitic. I don't really have to get into these too much. Most of you should be pretty familiar with these, and some of you have probably even seen some out in nature. Now we're in phylum Arthropoda. So arthropods, these include insects. They're the most diverse and they have the most species. These have jointed appendages, and we'll look at some crustaceans, arachnids, which are spiders, and different insects. So here we have an arthropod, specifically a lobster, with specialized segments and appendages that you can just read through a little bit. And the whole entire outer skeleton is made of chitin, a very strong protein. This outer skeleton is called an exoskeleton, and if these arthropods want to get bigger, they have to shed their exoskeleton. And then we have four main groups. We have arachnids, which include spiders, scorpions, ticks, and mice. We have crustaceans, which include crabs, lobsters, crayfish, also known as crawdads, shrimps, and barnacles. So this first picture is of a shrimp, the second picture is of a barnacle. Fun fact about a barnacle, they have the longest penis in comparison to its body size. And then fun fact about lobsters, they have blue blood. They literally have blue blood because their hemoglobin uses copper instead of iron. And iron is what gives us our red blood. Because these are all arthropods, to get bigger, they have to shed their exoskeleton. So the larger they are, the older they are. And whenever they shed or molt this exoskeleton, they go through a stage where the new exoskeleton is really soft. And this is a little bit dangerous for them because it makes them more likely to be preyed upon. Next up, millipedes and centipedes. Only the largest centipedes bite, and then millipedes, they don't bite. That's all I have to say about them. And lastly, we have insects, and they are super diverse. They have a three-part body. They have a head, a thorax, an abdomen. They're super important in terms of the ecosystem. They're a part of very, 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 very many food chains. They can be pollinators, and they can have some super cool social systems, like bees and ants. Many insects go through metamorphosis. They can, there we go. Many insects go through metamorphosis. They can go through hemimetabolism, where they go through smaller instars to a bigger version of the same insect. Or, like in this picture right here, they can go through a holometabolous type of metamorphosis, where they go from one very different looking insect to another, like the butterfly. Why this would be evolutionarily advantageous would be that the larva and adult stage don't compete for the same food. So the larva, the caterpillar, will eat leaves, whereas the butterfly, the adult right there, will eat nectar. Heading over to phylum Mollusca, so mollusks. These are soft-bodied animals, protected sometimes by a hard shell. So we have snails, slugs, clams, octopi, squids, just to name a few. The list can go on. The body of a mollusk has three parts. It has the foot, which acts as the motion part. This foot has some nerves in it. We have the visceral mass, which is where the organs are. So you can see kidney, coelom, heart, reproductive organs, the digestive tract. And then we have the mantle. The mantle is the shell, and it can be hardened with calcium or it can be pretty soft, just depending on what kind of mollusk we're looking at. The first class of mollusks are called gastropods, and these are snails or slugs. They can live in aquatic or terrestrial regions, and they are hermaphrodites that can reproduce sexually or asexually. Then we have bivalves, so clams, oysters, scallops. They have two halves, and the middle portion is their body. One of the most endangered is the giant clam, and it can be over 500 pounds. The oldest was found in Iceland, and it was born around year 1500. Isn't that insane? That's crazy. Alright, then we have cephalopods. These are amazing. These are super, super cool. Cephalopods may or may not have a shell. They include octopi, cuttlefish, squid. This example right here that we're looking at is of the mimic octopus. It's called a mimic octopus because it mimics other animals. It mimics what they look like, how they behave. Here, it's mimicking a flounder. You can see how it's flat and it's swimming like a flounder swims. And below that, it's mimicking a lionfish. Lionfish have venomous spines, so it would be super good for the mimic octopus to mimic a lionfish to keep predators away. Nobody wants to be exposed to venomous spines. And there at the bottom, we have it mimicking a very venomous sea snake. And all of this helps it to survive. So predators are going to tend to avoid these really dangerous venomous animals, right? I would if I were a predator in this environment. But anyways, mimic octopi they're just super incredible. And not only do they change their coloration and body, but they also behave like the animal that they're mimicking. And octopi are just in general really, really intelligent creatures. They are amazing at problem solving. They can identify different pictures. They can unscrew themselves from inside of lids. Once they go through a maze, they can learn it and then have less trouble going through it again. They're just super smart, super cool. There are so many stories online about different things that cephalopods, that octopi have been noticed and recorded as doing. I don't know. Yeah, I should look some of those things up. There's really, really cool stories out there. Next up, we have echinoderms. So these are named after the spiny surfaces of the organism. So this has sea stars, sand dollars, sea urchins, sea cucumbers. And sea stars have this really awesome regenerative property where if you cut off one limb from the sea star, it'll grow a new sea star. Kind of cool. So echinoderms, they're all marine. They don't have body segments. They usually have an endoskeleton, and then they have this water vascular system that helps them with gas exchange and helps them get rid of waste. Now on to vertebrates. So we're moving to the backbone. Vertebrates are represented by mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, fish, and they have unique features including a cranium that houses a brain and then backbones. So we're going to look at their specific characteristics and the phylogenetic tree. So phylum Chordata, chordates. Most vertebrates fall into this phylum, and we're going to talk about some specific characteristics and how all of this happens. But real fast, the only other animal considered the only other animals considered chordates that are invertebrates, so that don't have backbones, are lancelets and tunicates. They're both marine filter feeders, and they're very similar to ancestors of all vertebrates. So we consider these chordates, but they are not vertebrates, and this is the only exception. So when we say chordate, what do we mean? So first we have something called a dorsal hollow nerve cord, which becomes our central nervous system. It turns into our brain and our spinal cord, or it develops, I shouldn't say turns. It develops into our brain and spinal cord. Next we have the notochord. It's harder, it's more fibrous. It becomes our intervertebral disc, so our vertebrae. That's what it develops into. Then we have these pharyngeal gill slits. In the womb, we all had gills. We all had gill slits in the womb. And what those do is they fuse as we develop into part of our larynx, our hyoid, our inner ear bones. But when we are in the womb, we do have pharyngeal gill slits. And then lastly, a postanal tail. We have our tailbone. It's less prominent than other animals, but it's there. Here's a pretty good visual of everything. So brain, you can see on this dorsal hollow nerve cord, look at where the notochord is, where the pharyngeal gill slits are, postanal tail. All right, now we're going to look at chordate and vertebrate evolution. We're going to start from long ago and talk about adaptations that come about along the way. So fish started evolving in early Cambrian period. later on in the Devonian, they totally diversified, but we're going to look at fish during the Cambrian right now. First, we have our jawless fish. The agnathans are the jawless fish, and today we see them as lampreys. So these right here, the things attached to this fish, are the lampreys. After the jawless, the two major groups of fish were chondrichthyes, the cartilaginous fish like sharks, and osteichthyes, the bony fish. So osteo stands for bone. Clownfish are an example. Interesting with clownfish, the smaller ones are males, and there's one female, and once she dies or moves on, the next largest male becomes a female. Clownfish are super interesting. Alright, sharks. Sharks have cool adaptations too. Sharks are cartilaginous fish. They have a flexible skeleton made of cartilage, which gave them that name, chondrichthyes. They have what are called ampullae of Lorenzini in the front portion of their nose. These are sensory organs that act as sensory modalities for electrical impulses, so they can seek out electrical impulses with these ampullae. And they have a lateral line system that tells them how vibrations are moving. So scientists did this experiment where they had a shark in a tank. They put a dead flounder in one side and they sent this electrical impulse into the other. And interestingly enough, the shark went towards the electrical impulse and not the dead flounder. So instead of relying on its sense of smell, it relied on its sensory modalities for this electrical impulse, these ampullae of Lorenzini. Bony fishes have a skeleton with hard calcium. They also have the lateral line system, which helps them function in schools. And they've got these operculum flares where the gills kind of hang out. And about the eyesight, when we talk about they have excellent eyesight, you just remember they're more talking about eyes and fish. Their eyes are underwater. So they have to develop this good eyesight to make their way through murky areas, right? Moving on. Most bony fishes are ray-finned. Think of it as a sun's rays going into the fin. And these are the fish that we would think of, so like the clownfish that we just saw earlier. But we have these lungfishes, so this first fish right here is the lungfish on the left. And lungfishes probably share a common ancestor with early terrestrial animals. You can easily see how their fins differ from that of like a clownfish that we just saw, or even this fish. The fins are pretty different between this fish and the lungfish on the left. We also have something called low fin fishes. So the second picture right there, they have pairs of fins but only have one bone going in, and most are extinct. Today we just have coelacanths left, and they can get really, really big. So we talked about fish, so now let's move on to amphibians, which are partially in water and on land. And amphibians rely a lot on the water. They need water to reproduce so that their eggs don't dry out. Amphibians were the first to colonize land. They descended from ancestors similar to those of lungfish, and their fins had muscles and bony developments. And this is where Tiktaalik fits in. So Tiktaalik is our early amphibian. So we call these tetrapods, terrestrial vertebrates. Tetrapods just means 4 legs, so tetra, 4 pods, feet or legs. Moving ahead to reptiles. So these include snakes, lizards, turtles, crocodiles, alligators, and I didn't know if you know this, but it also includes birds. Love birds. I love birds. So aves aren't part of reptiles. And all of these have eggs with amniotic sacs. They can live completely on land. They are not dependent on water to reproduce like amphibians are. Some adaptations for living on land include scales to prevent dehydrating, lungs for breathing, the amniotic egg, which is in a shell with an amniotic sac that the developing embryo or zygote feeds on, and it doesn't require external water sources. Sorry. Lizards are ectotherms, for example. They have to sit on a rock in the sun to warm up. So when you see garter snakes come out to mate, they have to warm up in the sun first. Whereas birds are endotherms. So non-bird reptiles are ectotherms. Birds are endotherms. Reptiles diversified during the Mesozoic, and birds evolved from dinosaurs. Watch a chicken running around. It's like a little raptor. Alright, birds or aves, they can fly, obviously. Their bones are lightweight and they've developed feathers. Both of these are really important adaptations for flight. Bird bones have lots of space, which makes them so light, more aerodynamic. They have less organs, and then they are also endotherms, so they have a constant body temperature just like we do. Birds are really interesting. They get lift just like an airplane. Frigate birds are large marine birds that can fly for up to 6 months based on different flight properties, how they maneuver through the air, and all these different things coming together that just allow birds to be so efficient with flight. Really cool things. We're not going to get into super specifics, but I did want to mention that. Birds are so awesome. So now we're going to move on to mammals. Their closest ancestors were the same ancestors as reptiles about 225 million years ago. Most mammals are terrestrial, but some really amazing ones are aquatic. So like dolphins, for example. Dolphins are pretty cool. What makes us mammals and really differentiates us is our hair, and it's our mammary glands that produce milk to feed our young. Interestingly, there are 3 major groups of mammals. First are monotremes. These mammals lay eggs, and this is an echidna. Really cute, right? Really spiky, adorable little thing. Next we have marsupials. So these are pouched mammals. In this picture, you're seeing a small offspring in a pouch. Notice how it's attached to the nipple as it grows. There's no placenta there. So this is the little guy in the pouch attached to the nipple. And lastly, we have placental mammals called eutherians. The placenta forms around the fetus when childbirth happens. There's a completely developed baby. So in this picture, you see a baby zebra, and you can still see the placenta. It's super rich in nutrients, and a lot of animals will actually eat the placenta after birth. Some animals, like the baby zebra, are what we call precocious, which means it can immediately run around. Dolphins, when they're first born, they immediately swim up for air, so they're also precocious. This is super evolutionarily advantageous. Think about it against predation. If this zebra can immediately run, if that dolphin can immediately swim, it's going to be okay. It's going to be able to outrun or outswim if it needs to. Whereas human babies are not precocious. They're altricial. They are very defenseless. They come out and they can't do anything. Whereas zebras come out, dolphins come out, and they're already running around, swimming around. Alright, now on to human ancestry, primate evolution. Humans are primates, and this helps us understand our origins. Primates, they evolved about 100 million years ago from insect-eating mammals in the late Cretaceous. And early ones were tree-living, so they were arboreal. And then once they became arboreal, we saw some adaptations to help these primates live in trees more easily. These include limber shoulder joints, which allow them to turn, grab onto vines. This includes eyes in the front of their face, which helps them with better vision. Excellent eye-hand coordination. They can transfer from limb to limb without falling. And then extensive parental care. So offspring need a lot of energy input from parents to be able to succeed later, because primate babies will also need a lot of parental care. So we have divided these primates into two main groups, prosimians and anthropoids. Prosimians include lemurs, lorises, and they're found throughout Africa and Asia. And they're the only primates in Madagascar natively, and many of these are nocturnal, so they are live and active at nighttime, and that's usually the reason why their eyes are so much bigger. Anthropoids, these include monkeys, Old World and New World monkeys. Old World monkeys are usually classified by being from Africa and Asia. Baboons are examples of these. They're really social and aggressive. Whereas New World monkeys you'll see in South America, and these are monkeys that have prehensile tails. So these are tails that grab onto trees. These New World monkeys are also dichromatic, so they can see two colors, whereas Old World have trichromatic sight abilities, so they see three. They see what we see: red, greens, and blues. Our closest living relatives, so we actually are apes. And it's not that we descended from apes, but that we have common ancestors. Here are just some different examples of apes. We have an orangutan, we have a chimp, we have a gorilla. If you look at this evolutionary tree, humans and apes share common ancestry about 5 to 7 million years ago. And then I just discussed this, but we're more like distant cousins to chimps. We didn't come from them. We just share common ancestry. And that is about it for this chapter. I hope you liked it. I really like these animal chapters. Animals are pretty cool. Alright, talk to you later.